The Seeds of Vengeance. There was a man whose name had long been forgotten by the world, but whose story still echoed through the quiet winds of the valley where his farm once stood. To the townspeople, he had been known simply as Eli, a humble farmer, a man of patience and a believer in the dignity of honest work. His hands were calloused from years of tilling the earth, and his back bent from carrying the burdens that came with it. But he carried his life with grace, his spirit never once broken by the cruelty of the seasons or the fickleness of fortune. For years, Eli had poured his soul into his land. The soil beneath his boots had been more than just earth. It had been his dream, his legacy, and the final piece of a promise made to his late father. The farm had survived storms that flattened neighboring fields and droughts that cracked the earth like old parchment. While others complained about bad luck, Eli simply worked harder, rising before the sun and laboring long after the stars appeared. But prosperity breeds envy, and in that same valley, envy wore the face of a man named Barrett Cole, a local businessman whose smile concealed greed sharp enough to cut through trust. Barrett saw what Eli had built and decided that he wanted it. Not because he needed it, but because he could not stand to see another man succeed where he himself had failed. It began with a loan. Small at first, meant only to help Eli through a harsh winter. The paperwork had been smooth, the terms fair on the surface. Barrett's charm had disarmed Eli's suspicions, and for a time, it seemed like an honest deal. But hidden beneath the ink and legal phrases were traps, clauses that turned kindness into chains. When the following season brought a flood that destroyed half the crops, Eli found himself behind on payments. Barrett pounced. Within months, Eli was buried in debt. He sold his livestock, his tools, and finally his equipment, each sale cutting a deeper wound into the farm's lifeblood. And then came the day when Barrett arrived with a smile and a folded document, the deed to the land. It was no longer Eli's. Through manipulation and deception, Barrett had taken everything. The day Eli walked off his land was the day his silence began. No one in town saw him after that. He disappeared like smoke, carrying only a small bag of belongings and the clothes on his back. The people whispered that he had gone mad. Some said he had left to die somewhere in the mountains. Barrett, meanwhile, wasted no time celebrating. He plowed Eli's fields under, erected fences, and renamed the place Coal Acres. But the earth remembers the hands that loved it. Years passed. The seasons came and went. Barrett's new farm grew, but never flourished. The soil seemed unwilling to yield under his management. Crops failed, workers left, and pests overran the fields. The land itself seemed cursed. Barrett's fortune dwindled, and yet his pride refused to bend. He expanded his reach, investing in other ventures, all of which eventually fell apart. What had once been Eli's thriving patch of paradise became a barren stretch of dirt, and the valley that had once been green turned gray under Barrett's greed. Then one spring morning, something changed. A group of children exploring the outskirts of town stumbled upon a small field, tucked behind a line of old oaks. It was land no one remembered owning, a forgotten patch near the river. There they found rows upon rows of golden crops, wheat so tall it shimmered in the sunlight, vegetables bursting from the soil in rich abundance. Word spread quickly. The townspeople, curious and amazed, gathered to see the miracle field. And standing at its edge, silent and calm, was Eli. He had returned, older, weathered, his hair now silver like the morning mist. No one knew where he had gone or how he had survived. Some whispered that he had found new land somewhere far away. Others believed he had been living off the wilds. But all who saw him knew one thing. This man had not been defeated. His eyes, once tired and kind, now burned with quiet determination. Eli did not speak of vengeance, yet every plant, every stalk, every grain of wheat growing from his new soil seemed to tell a story of it. He had taken the betrayal that destroyed him and transformed it into something life-giving. He worked alone at first, rising before dawn and tending his crops in silence. But soon people began to help him. A widow in town who had lost her home came to ask if she could work for food. Eli let her harvest vegetables freely. A young boy, thin from hunger, wandered into the field one afternoon, and Eli gave him bread made from his first yield. Word spread that Eli's crops never failed. No matter the weather, drought, flood, or frost, his fields produced enough to feed everyone who came. He never sold his harvest for profit. Instead, he gave it away. The townspeople who once turned their backs on him began to rely on his generosity. In a time when food was scarce and hope scarcer, Eli's field became the beating heart of the valley. And then came the drought. That summer the skies closed up. Rivers shrank to muddy trickles. Barrett's land, already struggling, turned to dust. His livestock died, his workers fled, and his debts grew until he had nothing left to sell. Desperate, he came to Eli's field one evening, broken and hollow. The townspeople watched from a distance as Barrett stood at the edge of that golden land, the very kind of land he had stolen once before, and bowed his head. Eli said nothing. He didn't need to. The next day, sacks of grain appeared at Barrett's doorstep. Enough to feed his family, enough to remind him what true strength looked like. Eli's revenge was not destruction, it was transformation. He had turned the pain of betrayal into nourishment for an entire town. His vengeance fed not only the hungry but the hearts of those who once judged him, teaching them that greatness was not found in power or wealth, but in endurance and grace. In time, Eli's field became known as the Giving Ground. The townspeople, inspired by his humility, began planting their own small gardens, sharing food freely among neighbors. The valley, once withered under greed, bloomed again under compassion. And Barrett, haunted by his guilt, began working beside Eli each morning, not as a rival but as a servant to the soil he had once cursed. It wasn't forgiveness that healed the land. It was understanding. Eli never spoke about the past. He never mentioned the documents that had stolen his farm or the humiliation of losing everything. But sometimes, when he looked across his thriving fields and saw Barrett laboring with dirt-stained hands, a small smile would form on his face, not of victory, but of peace. For he had learned that revenge, when rooted in bitterness, poisons the soul, but when rooted in purpose, it can nourish the world. Years later, when Eli passed away, the entire town gathered in silence. They buried him beneath the same oaks where his new life had begun. The children of the valley, now grown, continued to tend the giving ground in his memory. Each harvest, they left a small portion of grain by his grave, letting the wind carry the scent through the fields. It was said that on quiet mornings, if one listened closely, they could still hear the rustle of Eli's boots through the crops, a soft reminder that no betrayal can bury a heart that refuses to stop giving. The story of Eli spread far beyond the valley. Travelers came to see the place where a man had turned his loss into life, his vengeance into kindness. And though many tried to copy his ways, none could ever quite capture the same miracle because the secret had never been in the soil. It had been in the heart of the man who worked it. Eli's name faded into legend, but his lesson remained, that the purest form of revenge is not to destroy your enemies, but to outgrow them so completely that their cruelty becomes the soil from which your greatness blooms. And so the valley thrived. The people prospered, and the earth at last was at peace. But deep beneath the roots of the giving ground, in the quiet cradle of the soil, a new seed stirred, a seed that carried within it the whispers of another story, waiting to rise, waiting to remind the world once more that no good deed, no act of endurance ever truly ends.